Hello and welcome to today's episode of Talk on Things and Stuff. It's been a little while since we've had a regular episode, and a lot of that is because I have been trying to do kind of a deep dive to get a little bit more understanding and knowledge of the next subject that I want to tackle in a series over the next several podcast episodes. And that is learning about the great proletarian cultural revolution of China, how it came to reshape the cultural landscape of China, and what we can learn from examining the history of all the various social forces that came to a head in that very tumultuous time. And if you start Googling and if you search cultural revolution in China, you're going to find that people are talking about it much more commonly, because some of the events that we have been seeing in Western countries have sort of a reminiscence of the Cultural Revolution. The last episode, we talked about how ideology and dogma play into individuals' identities and shape the narrative and give them motivation for various actions that they then take in their lives based on that ideology and dogma. And the Cultural Revolution is just a moment in human history where ideology was so high up on the motivating factors over the entire society that you kind of get to see it in almost its purest form. So if you take some time, find out who's talking about the Cultural Revolution, you're going to find that there are a few really vocal and powerful voices out there that happen to be Chinese immigrants who themselves grew up in the cultural milieu of the Cultural Revolution and have since come and made homes in America. We've got the opportunity to compare the different places and are speaking out about it now. And one of the voices that you will hear is Dr. Pingnan Shi. He goes by Dr. Ping, and he's got a couple of really powerful discussions that you can find on various podcasts. One of them is really looking at what's happening in the discussions around critical theory and critical race theory, and finding how there are parallels between that ideology and what happened in the context of the Cultural Revolution. So I reached out to Dr. Ping, and he was kind enough to offer to come and share his experience, and I'm going to bring him on board right now. Dr. Ping, how are you doing?
Good. Hi. How are you doing, Jonathan?
I'm doing great. Thank you for coming on. Now, can you just kind of give us a little bit of background of what your experience was in the Cultural Revolution, how you came to America, and then we're going to explore a little bit about the historical context at the start of the Cultural Revolution, and then take a look at some oral histories. So, what's your story start?
Well, I was born in 1963, and the Cultural Revolution started in 1966. So I was about 3 years old, but both my older brothers, they are old enough, and also my oldest sister, so they are old enough to be Red Guards, and actually both my brothers have joined some kind of military groups during that time, and for me personally, it's because my dad was imprisoned because he was a party official. And during the Great Purge, he was basically illegally imprisoned, and my family was kicked out from our apartment and kind of expelled to the countryside. So my mom actually had to work in a factory cafeteria for a couple of years, and before my dad was eventually reinstalled back to his former post. And what I can remember, actually, I mean, there's some bits and pieces before I started the elementary school. But when I started elementary school in 1970, and that is full blown, well, there's two things that happened. One is the Cultural Revolution, and a couple of years later, there is something called the Education Revolution. So that experience kind of remind me of what's happening.
It sounds like by the time you were a little bit older and had entered school, it was kind of in the middle of the Cultural Revolution. And we'll get into kind of the different phases of the Cultural Revolution in a little bit. Early on, that was marked by a great deal of violence.
Right.
And then the army was called in to quell some of that violence. They started sending some of the Red Guards out to the countryside. Mm-hmm. And that probably would have been around where you were starting to enter school once the most tumultuous time had ended.
Right.
By the time you entered school, the culture had already been kind of reshaped and reformed by the effects of that intense ideological purging that had happened in the most extreme times. What was life like at that time?
So starting in 1966, there is a 2-year time that all schools are shutting down. I mean, everywhere.
Mhm.
Universities and high school, middle school, and all that, they all get shut down.
Is that by government decree, or was that just the schools deciding on their own to do that?
Well, because Chairman Mao unleashed the Red Guards, they actually bring destructions everywhere they went. So there is basically, you won't be able to function.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it's worth going into a definition here, because I have a bunch of misconceptions, since this is a chapter of world history that in America we don't really get exposed to.
Right.
When I hear the term Red Guard, I usually think, oh, that must be the military. Was the Red Guard a branch of the military?
No, never.
What was the Red Guard?
Well, it started in the universities, started in Tsinghua University and Beijing University, those two, kind of like Ivy League universities in China, and then spread out to other colleges. So the first group of Red Guards, they were college students. And then they bring this so-called Cultural Revolution to the high school and then to the middle schools. So the majority of the Red Guards are high school and middle school students.
Okay, so basically, if you want to conceptualize this to Western ears, it's not an official branch of the military.
No.
It's not even an official branch of the Communist Party itself. No. It's not within the party apparatus, because Mao called on the youth to form these organizations in a way to purge the party under him. And so they couldn't actually be in the authority of the party. They had to be independent. And so it's basically a bunch of self-organized students who come together. And these aren't just any students. These are students who were born in the communist regime. Mm-hmm. The communists took power in 1949, and they immediately underwent a socialist re-education program where they had all of the teachers become indoctrinated with socialist principles and ideas, and then had them instruct the youth in those ideals. So all of these youth had grown up idolizing Chairman Mao, and Mao Zedong thought being basically the ideology that their entire worldview was shaped by. So when he called on them, justified and legitimizing rebellion and saying bombard the headquarters and all the other orders that we'll see, they took their orders directly from Mao, and he was basically saying a bunch of people who were trying to revise back to old capitalist ways had infiltrated the Communist Party. And we've got to purge these people who are less than pure, according to Mao Zedong thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, my dad at that time, he was a party official. So he was kind of higher up in the local level. Like he was an executive at a big factory. So he was imprisoned by the Red Guards during that purge. So basically, Mao used the Red Guards to overturn the whole party hierarchy.
I see. And so you grew up in the school system in the most tumultuous times. I know after a period of time, particularly after Mao died, a lot of the chaos of the Cultural Revolution died down. Again, we're going to dive into the specifics of this and look at some documentary films to go into it. How did you make your way to America?
Well, actually, I made my way to Canada first. So I went to college. Mao died in 1976. I went to college in 1978. So I started my school in 1970. I went to college in 78. So I only have 8 years before I went to college. And then was in charge. He actually is trying to open up China to the outside world.
You're referring to Deng Xiaoping, who took over after Mao died, and he started to do a lot of the things that Mao had originally started the Cultural Revolution to undo, which is started to introduce more market capitalist principles, blending them with the Communist Party itself to try to overcome all of the famine that took place in the Great Leap Forward. We'll get into all these details in a little bit, but so you were a young man. Was this college that you went to in China, or had you
China? In China,
okay.
Actually, the China opened up in early 1980s, so it's about time I graduated from college. So I won a scholarship from the Chinese government, and so I was sent to Canada to study engineering. So I was kind of, a number in their 5-year plan. They decide how many people they send out to the Western world to learn technologies, to learn engineering. And then we were supposed to go back and to help to build China.
So did that happen? Did you end up going back?
Well, what happened is 1989, the Tiananmen Square massacre, the June 4th, and the Chinese government actually sent soldiers to clear the Tiananmen Square. So they killed a lot of people. I mean, until this day, we don't know how many, but the estimation is about like 10,000 in that range.
Wow.
Yeah. And so basically, people like me who are in the West, in Canada, in the US, we cannot go back. And so,
was it that you felt like you couldn't go back, or the government didn't want you, and you had been contaminated with Western ideas? They didn't want you coming back.
Well, it's because a lot of us actually were supporting the movement.
Okay.
Because like my generation was kind of came to age during the time that we are trying to open the China outside, trying to become more democratic. And of course, we support the students on the square, because that was a huge movement. That was a student-led movement. And because our activities, like my wife and I were very active, so we were put on the blacklist. And so if we went back at that time, we will be put in jail.
So did you apply for refugee status, or how did you enter a new world here?
Canada actually allowed us to stay, even though we, in fact, is political refugees, but the Canadian government didn't call that way. It just kind of, allowed us to stay, but not calling us as refugees, because they still don't want to offend the Chinese government.
Oh, I see. So it was kind of just like, you can stay, extended visa as long as you're here. And then there's a pathway to citizenship for you as well?
Well, actually, at the time, they opened up the green card pass to us. So most of us, pretty much all of us who were in Canada at that time, applied the green card.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And where do you find yourself now? Did you stay in Canada? Are you in the U.S. now, or what?
I'm in the U.S. Actually, I finished my PhD in 1991, and I worked 4 years, and then I find a job in Indianapolis. So I came to the U.S. in 1995. Right. So I'm a Canadian citizen and also a U.S. citizen, kind of a dual citizen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you grew up in a school system that was heavily steeped in communism and socialist ideals. When did you first see the difference in the way that the Western world thought in terms of capitalism, and how did you reconcile those things when you were first exposed to those ideas?
Yeah, that was during my college years. So we have access to the outside, even though not as much as we would like to, but we were able to kind of listening to the Voice of America and things like that. And also there are some magazines that they translate Western stories, short stories or long story, novels and all that. So that's how I got to see what's actually outside. And also during that time, many people are starting to reflect, trying to figure out what went wrong. It's kind of like how to say, in a way, kind of like you get drunk, right? And then you wake up the next day, you try and say, what happened? And how do I got there? So that was a period, a lot of Chinese, especially intellectuals and students were doing the soul searching and trying to figure out what happened. Because, when you say bad things happen in the Cultural Revolution, none of us are really innocent, right? Like when I was a student, I participate in those kind of activities, right? We are trying to criticize our teachers, went to rallies and all that. And we thought we are doing the right thing. But once Mao died, then there are people who are starting to share their experience, their stories, which is totally different from what we perceived or imagined. Yeah. And that's where people got waking up, say, oh, what happened? The government actually lied to us. And if they lied to us in such a way, what else they they lied us too, right? It's starting to
Yeah.
figure out what's going on here. Yeah.
No, I think my audience will be able to relate to that experience. You know, if you're in a religious institution that shapes your entire worldview, defines good and bad, and then tells you that your goodness is amplified by your willingness to act on your convictions, then that type of wiring in human history has gone to extremes, leading people to do things that they think are acting out of righteousness. Then later on, they reflect that they had been deceived, misled, and drawn into a social movement that was powered by its own, righteous moral outrage that leads them to do things that they, on reflection, should not have done and regret. And we'll see some examples of that. I think that statement that you made where, we're all guilty. Almost every person that I've listened to who survived through the Cultural Revolution, even in the midst of them talking about how bad some of the things were, they always say, I participated as well. I was swept up in it and I regret it. I feel so terrible about my, whether it's a child who denounced their parents and their parents were taken off and in some cases killed, or even the loss of a beloved teacher because of being swept up into these things.